For as long as I could remember, I had always wanted to be a dispatcher. Something about the blend of urgency and calm, of chaos and control, pulled me in. It seemed like the perfect job for someone like me, someone who thrived on structure but secretly enjoyed the thrill of a good mystery. After 6 months of training, I'd finally been assigned to the night shift at the 911 call center. It was a quiet town, barely a blip on the radar of the state map. Still, we handled everything from the mundane, stray dogs in the road, people needing directions, to the more serious, car accidents, medical emergencies, the occasional break-in. But that night changed everything. The call came through just past midnight. 911, what's your emergency? I could hear heavy breathing on the other end, slow and ragged, as though the person on the line was trying to calm themselves. Then, a soft, trembling voice spoke. There's someone in my house. My pulse quickened. Not unusual. Domestic break-ins were a common concern, and we had protocols in place. Still, something about the voice. It was different. The voice was hollow, as if the words were coming from a place too deep inside them, too far removed from reality. Can you tell me your location? I asked, typing the address into the system. Another long pause. I'm at 473 Hillside Road. But he's not here yet. I blinked at the screen. There was a glitch, a flicker, something in the system. I almost thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, can you clarify? You said he's not there yet. Yes, he's coming. The voice broke off into a strangled sob. Please, you have to help me. I sat up straighter in my chair, adjusting the headset. There was an odd sensation crawling up my spine. Something wasn't right. There was an edge to her voice, a desperation, like she knew something I didn't, like she was warning me. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. I'm dispatching officers to your location now. Please stay on the line. And the line went dead. I stared at the screen, heart racing, fingers hovering over the keyboard. There was nothing, no sign of the call on the log except the last recorded part of the message, the part where she begged for help. I replayed the recording again. I'm at 473 Hillside Road, but he's not here yet. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I hit the redial button, but no one answered. A feeling settled deep in my chest, a tightness that wouldn't go away. I did a quick search of the address, 473 Hillside Road. Nothing, no reports, no recent calls to that address, no incident history. I made a note to send a squad car anyway, just in case. It wasn't until the next morning, when the sun was barely up, that I learned about the house on 473 Hillside Road. The house was gone, not burned down, not a wreck, just gone. The land was empty, as if it had never been there at all. The entire block had been mapped out on old city records, but there was no property at that address. I called in a few favors, reached out to a local historian. The house didn't exist, not anymore. But I still heard her voice, a whisper in my head, warning me. 2 nights later, it happened again. The same voice, the same panic. 911, what's your emergency? There was no hesitation this time. I recognized the voice immediately, even though I had only heard it once. The woman from 473 Hillside Road. The one whose house was never there. Please, you have to listen to me. He's coming. He's already here. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I tried to sound calm, professional. I'd been through this before, right? What's your location, ma'am? I'm in the woods, she said, her voice trembling. The woods behind my house, but there's no way out. He's everywhere. I looked at the display. The call wasn't giving me any location data. It was as if she was calling from some kind of black hole in the system. No GPS coordinates, no address, just static. Ma'am, I need you to give me your exact location. I'll send help, but I need you to stay calm. I don't want them to come. Please, don't send them, she said, her voice shaking. If you do, they'll know. Who will know? I asked, my throat tightening. They already know everything. They're already here. I almost thought she was talking about something supernatural, some unseen presence lurking around her, but I couldn't afford to let my imagination take control. "Ma'am, please stay on the line with me. We're sending help." There was a loud crash on the other end of the line and then nothing. The call ended. I stared at the screen. I was about to hang up, but something stopped me. In the time it took me to disconnect, I realized the time code was strange, off by several minutes. Then, the worst part, I ran a search. No trace, no missing person report. No sign of a house, no woods, no trace of anything matching the call. I was left with a sense of dread, like I had opened a door I shouldn't have. The history of Hillside Road repeated itself. There was no such place. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. The first call had been disturbing, sure, but 2 in a row, in the same strange circumstances, it was too much to ignore. I reviewed the logs, looked through every detail of both calls. The caller had given me an address that didn't exist, and yet, I was certain I had heard the desperation in her voice, the panic, the fear, the sense of something coming that couldn't be stopped. The very thought of it made my skin crawl. I started keeping a journal of the calls. Each one was more disturbing than the last. They started to come more frequently, always with the same eerie sense of urgency. There was the woman in the hospital, begging for help as her room was locked down, except there was no record of a woman matching her name, no indication that anything unusual had happened in that ward. Another call came from a man who claimed to be trapped inside a car, but when the police arrived, the vehicle was empty. The most unsettling call of all was from a little girl who told me she had been locked in a closet, with the door opening every time she screamed. But the building, when I checked, had no such closet. Each call was more confusing, more terrifying. They all seemed to come from places that didn't exist, or places that no longer existed. I tried to trace the calls further, but every time I did, the lines led to dead ends. There were no files, no evidence. But I knew one thing for sure. They were all warnings. They were warnings about things that hadn't happened yet. I was no longer sure what was real. I'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, consumed by the need to track down the origin of these strange calls. It was like the universe was trying to send me a message, or perhaps to warn me of something far worse. And then, on the 7th night, it happened. The call came in like all the others, calm, too calm. "I'm at 2849 Northbridge Avenue," a man said, his voice low, almost soothing. I typed the address into the system. Nothing. "I'm waiting for them," he said. "Who?" I asked, my voice shaking now. "They're coming for you." And then the line went silent. I froze, staring at the screen. For the first time since I'd started taking these calls, the sensation of dread was almost unbearable. The call hadn't been a warning this time. It was a threat. I knew in that moment that whatever had been happening, the strange calls, the distorted messages, they were all leading up to something bigger, something I wasn't ready for. And as the clock on the wall ticked louder and louder, I felt it. The unmistakable weight of something in the dark, something waiting. I had no choice but to wait, too. The calls would come again, but this time, I was ready. The clock read 2:34 a.m. I was alone in the dispatch center, the hum of the overhead lights my only company. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the incoming calls, the occasional shuffle of paper on the desk as I reviewed old logs. My coffee cup sat untouched, the bitter liquid now lukewarm and unappealing. I'd been avoiding sleep for days now, driven by an unshakable compulsion to get to the bottom of these calls. But that night, as the hours passed, I started to feel something strange, a sensation I couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something more like awareness, as if the walls were closing in, as if something was watching me, waiting. My eyes darted toward the silent phone system, willing it to stay quiet. And then, just like that, the line rang again. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was strangely calm, though there was an underlying tremor in it that made my stomach twist. A man's voice, not the one I had heard last time, but close enough to make me pause. Please, please, you have to listen. I felt my heart skip a beat. That voice, I knew it. This man had called before, I was certain of it, but I couldn't place where I had heard him. Sir, what's the emergency? I tried to keep my tone steady, but the words caught in my throat. "I'm in the parking lot at the mall," he said. "The one near the old diner. I'm in the blue truck. You need to come. You need to get here now." I glanced at the monitor. His call showed no coordinates, no location, just a black screen and a flashing red light. "Sir," I began, but something in his voice made me freeze. There was a static crackle, and then the words came through like a whisper. "They're waiting for you." My hands trembled, almost dropping the receiver. I ran my fingers over the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself. There was something chillingly familiar about the words, but I couldn't place why. "Who's waiting for me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. The line went dead again. I looked at the clock. Just 2 minutes had passed, but my mind raced. The parking lot, the blue truck, the old diner, everything felt so wrong. My pulse pounded in my ears as I quickly typed the address into the system. There was no record of a parking lot, no diner, nothing at all. I checked the local maps, all of them. My breath caught when I realized the entire area he'd mentioned, the old diner, wasn't just missing from the map. It had never existed. I leaned back in my chair, trying to calm my breath. The feeling of dread was suffocating now. These calls, they were leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. It was nearly 4 a.m. when I got the next call. By then, I was no longer sure I could trust what I was hearing or seeing. The exhaustion, the fear, the sense of being caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was starting to cloud my judgment. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the isolation, the sleepless nights had broken me, but deep down, I knew I was hearing the truth, even if I didn't understand it. The phone rang again, piercing the silence with its shrill tone. 911, what's your emergency? There was a moment of silence, and then the voice came through, a woman's voice this time, breathless and trembling. "I'm not supposed to be here. It's not real. None of it is real. I know you're listening. You need to leave." I was taken aback. This wasn't like the other calls. This woman wasn't pleading for help. She wasn't panicked. She was warning me. The calmness in her voice was almost eerie. "Ma'am, where are you? What's going on?" "I'm in the house you've been looking for, the one that isn't supposed to exist." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the same woman from the first call, the one who had told me about someone coming to her house, the one who had vanished from 473 Hillside Road. But now, she was speaking in riddles. "What do you mean, what house?" I asked, trying to steady my shaking hands as I typed furiously at the system, trying to pull up any data. "There are no houses," she said cryptically, "and there is no way out. You can't run from what's coming. It's too late." My heart raced. The dread, that gnawing sensation I had been feeling for days, washed over me like a tide. "Ma'am, please. I need you to clarify. What's going on? Who's coming?" A long pause followed, then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, she said, "You've already seen them." Before I could ask her to elaborate, the line went silent. The room felt colder all of a sudden. I could hear my own breathing, shallow, erratic, as I scanned the call logs. The address, the house that wasn't supposed to exist, 473 Hillside Road. There it was again. But this time, something new appeared on the screen, a map. Not just the old street or the old neighborhood. This map was different, distorted, as if the very geography had been warped. In the center of it, like a target, was a place I knew. It was my own home. I swallowed hard. No, that couldn't be right. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I clicked the location. A new set of coordinates appeared just across town, a few miles from where I was sitting. But when I typed it into the search bar to investigate, nothing came up. Just a black hole in the system, the data erased like it had never been there in the first place. A sudden realization hit me. These calls weren't just about people in danger. They were warning me, showing me the way to something that had been erased, something buried beneath the surface of this town. I could feel it now, the weight of it, pressing in from all sides. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I hadn't slept, but there was no time for rest. The calls had increased in frequency, and each one grew more cryptic and unnerving. I knew that something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. That afternoon, I found a box in the corner of my office. It had been buried under old files, forgotten in the clutter. It wasn't supposed to be there. No one had ever mentioned it to me before. I didn't even know it existed. I opened it cautiously, the lid creaking like a coffin. Inside, there were old photographs, yellowed with age. Most of them were of the town, old streets and buildings, faces I didn't recognize. But then, there was one photo that made my blood run cold. It was a group of people standing in front of a house I knew all too well, 473 Hillside Road. I flipped through the rest of the photos, each one showing the same house, the same group of people gathered on the porch, smiling. In one photo, a man stood at the edge of the group, his face obscured by shadows, but his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. The same eyes that had haunted my dreams, the same eyes I had seen in every one of the calls. I was no longer sure if I was dealing with something human or something far darker. The calls, the photos, the house that no longer existed, they were all part of a larger puzzle, a puzzle I was now determined to solve. But as I traced the faces in the photographs, one name kept repeating in my mind. The man from the parking lot, the one who had warned me, he was in the photo too. And his eyes were staring directly at me. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. The eyes of the man seemed to follow me, glistening with a knowing malice that crawled up my spine. My hands shook as I held the photo up to the light, but it didn't help. Every angle, every shadow of his face was still wrong. The other people in the image were frozen in time, smiling, oblivious, but not him. He stood apart, his gaze directed straight at me, and I felt as though he could see me. I dropped the photo back into the box, trembling. What did it mean? Why had I found this? And why was I seeing the same man in my calls, as though he were haunting me? Was he behind all of this? Was he the one orchestrating these messages, these cryptic warnings? I rushed to the phone, dialing the number of the local historian I had contacted earlier. Maybe he could shed some light on the photo, on the history of the house. Maybe I had missed something. As the phone rang, my mind raced through the possibilities. The house on 473 Hillside Road had to be real once, but why had it disappeared from every map, every record? Why was no one else remembering it, as if it had never existed? And why did it all feel connected to me? The phone clicked in my ear, and the historian's voice came through, deep and steady as usual. "Hello? Sam, it's me. It's happening again. The calls, the man in the photos. I need you to look into something I missed. It's about 473 Hillside Road." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a strange pause before Sam spoke again, his voice strained. "I told you, there's nothing there. No records, no history. That house is just..." He stopped himself. "Sam," I pressed, my pulse quickening. "What's going on? What aren't you telling me?" His voice faltered, then he sighed. "I'm sorry. I've been meaning to tell you this for a while. It's not something you're going to want to hear, but 473 Hillside Road. It was never just a house. It was a place people used to disappear from. People who were trying to escape something. A group of people, your photo people. They tried to bury what happened there, wipe it clean from the records. The house, it didn't vanish by accident." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? What group? What happened?" Sam didn't answer right away. Then, when he did, his voice was barely audible. "You're not the first one to hear those calls, you know. That's why they erased everything, because it was never supposed to get out. Those calls, they're not just warnings, they're memories, echoes of something that happened at that house long ago." "What happened?" My voice was barely a whisper now. "I shouldn't have said anything," Sam said quickly. "Look, I have to go. Just forget about it, okay? Leave it alone." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, the silence deafening. Memories, echoes. What did that even mean? Had the house been a place where people were trapped so deeply that their voices lingered, reaching across time, across space, to warn others? A part of me screamed to let it go, to walk away, but I couldn't. Not now. Something in my gut told me the answers I needed were just out of reach, and I couldn't stop now. I had to understand. I had to know the truth. I turned back to the box of photos. As I rifled through them again, trying to focus, my mind buzzing with Sam's cryptic words, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Something was off. Something was wrong. I reached the bottom of the box, and there, hidden beneath the old papers, was a folded piece of yellowing paper, a letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it carefully, the paper cracking at the edges, revealing the handwriting inside. It was old but still legible. To whoever finds this, I am writing this because I know what we've done, what we've caused. The house was a prison, and now we are its prisoners. We thought we could escape, but we were wrong. It is not the house that holds us. It is the thing that waits outside. It knows you now. You can't escape. Do not listen to the calls. Do not try to help. It will only make it worse. It will come for you, too. L. My blood ran cold as I read the final words. It knows you now. The phone rang again. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The number on the caller ID was blocked, but I knew what it was before I picked up. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was not human. It wasn't the woman or the man I had heard before. It was something else, something wrong, low, guttural, like an animal trying to speak. You shouldn't have found the letter, it rasped. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was so familiar, so cold. It was him, the man from the photos. You're too late. The voice continued, its tone dripping with malice. We're all connected now. You're part of this. I tried to speak, but no words came. My mind spun, the room closing in around me. You are the next one, the voice growled. You can't stop what's already been set in motion. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came. The voice laughed, a sound that sent a chill down my spine before it grew louder, more distorted. Then silence. The call ended. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a tightness, a constriction, as if something unseen was pulling at my very soul. I looked around, the walls pressing in on me, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. I was no longer alone. A sound echoed in the room, a soft scraping, like fingernails on the floor. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. In the corner of the room, there was a shadow, not a shadow that belonged to any object. It was moving, shifting, stretching out of the darkness. It was him, the man from the photo, the one who had been waiting. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I understood. It wasn't over, it had only just begun, and whatever had been waiting for me, it was here now.